Some people leave your life because they stop loving you. Others disappear because life gives them no choice. If anyone had told Ethan Brooks that the woman who once knew every dream hidden behind his quiet smile would suddenly be standing 20 feet away after 15 years, he would have shaken his head, smiled politely, and kept walking. Life had taught him not to expect miracles. It had taught him to wake before sunrise, pack school lunches, fold tiny sweaters still warm from the dryer, and stretch every dollar until payday arrived. Miracles belong to other people. Saturday mornings belonged to fathers like him. The autumn air carried just enough chill to make everyone zip their jackets as families wandered through the Harbor Hope Children's Foundation Gala, an annual charity event held inside a renovated waterfront warehouse overlooking Boston Harbor. White lights hung from exposed wooden beams, soft jazz drifted across the room, and the scent of fresh coffee mixed with cinnamon pastries floated through the crowd. 8-year-old Maya Brooks skipped 2 steps ahead, her small sneakers tapping against the polished concrete floor while clutching a handmade paper butterfly she had colored earlier that week. "Daddy, look. Mine has blue wings now," she said, holding it high with the kind of pride only children could possess. Ethan crouched beside her with the same patient smile that had carried both of them through years of scraped knees, late-night homework, and birthdays celebrated with homemade cakes instead of expensive parties. "I think those are the prettiest wings in the whole building," he said. Maya giggled, completely satisfied. Ethan brushed an invisible speck of glitter from her jacket before standing again. His navy t-shirt fit comfortably beneath a charcoal flannel overshirt. Worn jeans showing faint signs of years spent working with his hands. There was nothing remarkable about his appearance except the quiet confidence that came from surviving difficult seasons without letting them harden his heart. Around them, executives discussed donations while photographers captured smiling couples beneath banners celebrating generosity and hope. Ethan didn't belong to their world, at least not on paper. He had come because the community center where Maya attended after-school programs had received an invitation, and every child was encouraged to showcase artwork inside the gallery. That reason was enough. Across the room, a black luxury SUV pulled up outside the glass entrance. Conversations softened almost instinctively as a familiar figure stepped onto the sidewalk. Claire Whitmore adjusted the sleeve of her elegant black dress before thanking her driver with a warm nod. Cameras flashed politely rather than aggressively. At 31, she had built Whitmore Urban Design into one of New England's fastest-growing architectural firms, but success had never erased the quiet loneliness she carried home each evening. She smiled graciously at donors, accepted handshakes, and answered questions with practiced ease while her bright blue eyes wandered almost absent-mindedly across the crowd. Then Tom stumbled. Her gaze landed on a tall black man laughing softly as a little girl proudly showed him a paper butterfly. The room faded into a blur of moving silhouettes. 15 years vanished without asking permission. She knew that laugh. She knew the gentle way he bent slightly whenever a child spoke, making them feel taller instead of smaller. She knew the warmth in those brown eyes even before he turned enough for the afternoon light to reach his face. Ethan. Her heartbeat became strangely uneven, not from surprise alone, but from the weight of every unanswered question she had carried for nearly half her life. She had imagined this moment 1,000 different ways, yet none of those dreams prepared her for seeing him smiling as though the years between them had quietly folded into a single ordinary Saturday. Claire forgot to breathe. For a moment, she stood perfectly still while the cheerful voices around her blended into a distant hum, as though the harbor itself had swallowed every sound except the memory echoing inside her heart. 15 years earlier, they had been inseparable teenagers in a quiet neighborhood outside Providence, sharing library books, walking home beneath maple trees, and believing that growing up meant nothing more than choosing the right college. Ethan had always walked on the outside of the sidewalk, never because anyone told him to, but because kindness seemed woven into every ordinary thing he did. Claire remembered rainy afternoons when he carried 2 backpacks because she insisted on bringing too many books. She remembered how he laughed whenever she became too serious. More than anything, she remembered the final afternoon she saw him before everything changed. She had waited at the old train station with a folded letter clutched tightly inside her coat pocket. He never came. At least that was what she had believed for 15 long years. Miss Whitmore, her assistant Daniel asked softly beside her. The auction begins in 10 minutes. Claire blinked, returning to the present with practiced composure. Yes, of course. Daniel followed her gaze across the room. Do you know that gentleman? Claire hesitated only a heartbeat. A long time ago, she answered quietly. Long before any of this. Daniel smiled politely, unaware that those few words carried an entire lifetime. Across the gallery, Maya tugged gently on Ethan's hand. Daddy, that lady keeps looking over here. Ethan glanced up for only a second before politely looking away again. She is probably watching the artwork, sweetheart. Maya tilted her head. No, she is looking at you. Ethan smiled, amused by the certainty only children possessed. Maybe she thinks I have good taste in butterflies. Maya laughed, satisfied with the answer, but Ethan felt an unexpected tug somewhere deep inside him. Something about the elegant blonde woman seemed strangely familiar, though he could not place the memory. Time had changed faces, voices, and lives. He dismissed the feeling and knelt beside Maya as another volunteer complimented her colorful butterfly. You made this all by yourself? The elderly volunteer asked. Maya nodded proudly. Daddy says every butterfly starts as something that thinks it cannot fly yet. The volunteer smiled warmly before looking at Ethan. That is a beautiful lesson. Ethan shrugged with gentle humility. Children remember hope better when they can hold it in their hands. Claire overheard those words from across the room. Her eyes immediately filled with emotion she refused to let anyone see. That sentence. He had said nearly the same thing to her when she failed her first college entrance practice exam. She had cried behind the public library while convinced her future had disappeared. Ethan had folded an old receipt into the shape of a butterfly and placed it in her hand. Hope is easier to carry when it has wings, he had whispered. She had kept that tiny paper butterfly for years inside a small wooden box hidden in her apartment, alongside photographs, birthday cards, and letters she never mailed. Daniel gently cleared his throat again. Everyone is waiting for your welcome speech. Claire nodded, though her attention never truly left Ethan. Meanwhile, Ethan accepted a small paper cup of coffee from another volunteer. As he thanked her, his eyes drifted once more toward the stage where Claire now stood beneath the warm lights. Something stirred inside him again. Not recognition. Not yet. Just the quiet feeling that somewhere in the story of his life, he had seen those eyes before. If you're enjoying this story so far, do not forget to like this video and subscribe to Black Dad Destiny. Every day, we bring you touching stories, emotional love stories, and unforgettable journeys inspired by the moments that change people's lives forever. Claire stepped behind the podium with the effortless confidence people expected from someone who managed billion-dollar projects and spoke before packed conference halls without missing a single word. Yet as she looked across the room, every carefully prepared sentence seemed suddenly less important than one quiet man standing beside a display of children's artwork. She welcomed the guests, thanked the donors, and spoke about investing in young lives because every child deserved someone who believed in them before they believed in themselves. The audience responded with warm applause, but Ethan barely noticed the elegant speech. His attention belonged entirely to Maya, who whispered excitedly every time another visitor stopped to admire her butterfly. That was enough for him. He had learned years ago that the smallest victories often became the biggest memories. As the presentation ended, guests began moving toward the silent auction tables. Claire accepted congratulations with practiced grace while politely excusing herself from one conversation after another. Daniel noticed the unusual urgency in her movements. Do you need a few minutes before the interviews? He asked. She smiled faintly. Please tell them I will be delayed. Everything all right? Daniel asked. Claire looked toward Ethan again. There is someone I should have spoken to many years ago. Daniel did not ask another question. Across the gallery, Maya stopped beside a table displaying old photographs of local neighborhoods. One faded black and white picture caught her attention. Daddy, look. This place looks pretty. Ethan leaned closer. It was an old train station surrounded by maple trees. Something inside him tightened without warning. A memory flickered. Autumn leaves. A bench. A girl laughing because she had dropped a stack of books. He stared a second longer before quietly stepping back. It is beautiful, he said softly, although he could not explain why the picture felt strangely familiar. An elderly volunteer arranging brochures smiled kindly. That station closed about 15 years ago. Lots of young people used to meet there after school. Ethan nodded politely. Looks like it held a lot of stories. More than most people realize, the woman replied. Claire had paused only a few feet away. She heard every word. Her fingers tightened gently around the folded program she was holding. 15 years. The same number echoed through her mind with almost unbearable weight. She remembered standing beneath that station clock while rain collected on the platform roof. She remembered checking the time every few minutes, convinced Ethan would appear smiling and slightly out of breath because he always hated being late. She had waited until the final train departed. After that, silence became part of her life. A cheerful voice interrupted her thoughts. Miss Whitmore, would you sign my program? It was Maya, holding out the booklet with both hands. Claire's expression softened immediately. Of course. She knelt so they were eye level. What is your name? Maya Brooks. Claire froze almost imperceptibly before writing carefully across the page. Brooks. The surname landed gently but heavily inside her heart. She handed the program back with a warm smile. Your butterfly is my favorite piece in the exhibit. Maya beamed. Daddy helped me think of the colors. Claire looked up. Ethan was already approaching with an apologetic smile. I hope she is not interrupting your afternoon. Their eyes met for the first time at close distance. Neither spoke for a heartbeat longer than ordinary politeness required. Ethan searched her face, trying to understand why a complete stranger felt oddly familiar. Claire saw the same gentle eyes she had never truly forgotten, now carrying years of quiet responsibility and patient strength. Not at all, she answered softly. She made my afternoon better. Ethan smiled with genuine gratitude. Thank you. That means a lot to her. He nodded politely, took Maya's hand, and began walking toward the next exhibit, never realizing that Claire remained standing exactly where he had left her, watching him disappear into the crowd while wondering how someone could be only a few steps away after 15 years and still feel impossibly out of reach. Ethan guided Maya toward the children's activity corner where volunteers helped young guests decorate small wooden birdhouses. The little girl hurried ahead with quiet excitement, already deciding which colors she wanted to use. Ethan remained a few steps behind, carrying her light sweater over one shoulder while smiling at the sound of her laughter. To anyone watching, he looked like an ordinary father enjoying an ordinary afternoon. Claire knew better. She recognized the same calm rhythm he had always carried, the quiet habit of making sure everyone around him felt seen before he ever thought about himself. She wanted to walk over. She wanted to ask 100 questions that had lived inside her for 15 years. Instead, she stayed exactly where she was. Some distances could not be crossed by simply taking a few steps. Daniel returned with a tablet in his hand. The board members are ready whenever you are. Claire looked at the schedule before calmly handing it back. Please begin without me for another 15 minutes. Daniel raised an eyebrow, surprised but respectful. That is unusual. Claire smiled faintly. Today feels unusual. He nodded and quietly disappeared into the crowd. Nearby, Maya concentrated on painting tiny blue flowers across the roof of her birdhouse. One of the younger children accidentally tipped over a cup of paint, splashing bright yellow across the table. The little boy immediately looked terrified, expecting someone to scold him. Before any volunteer could react, Ethan stepped forward, picked up a stack of paper towels, and knelt beside the child with the same gentle expression he always used with Maya. Looks like the table wanted some color too, he said with a soft laugh. The boy looked up uncertainly. I am sorry. Nothing important was hurt, Ethan replied while calmly wiping away the paint. Mistakes clean up easier when people help each other. Within seconds, several children began handing him extra towels without anyone asking. One volunteer smiled. You are very good with kids. Ethan shrugged as though it required no special talent. They usually just need someone who stays calm. Claire watched the entire moment from across the room. She remembered another afternoon years ago when she had spilled an entire cup of coffee across her chemistry notes before a final exam. While everyone else complained about the mess, Ethan had simply smiled, found fresh paper, and spent 2 hours helping her rewrite every page from memory. He had never made her feel embarrassed. Somehow, even the smallest acts of kindness became unforgettable because of the way he offered them without expecting gratitude. Maya carried her finished birdhouse toward her father. Do you think birds would really live here? She asked. Ethan examined the tiny wooden house with exaggerated seriousness. If I were a bird, I would probably invite all my friends. Maya laughed so loudly that nearby guests smiled without realizing why. Claire felt herself smiling too. It had been years since a laugh reached her heart before. Reaching her mind. She had spent so much of her adult life surrounded by contracts, deadlines, and polished conference rooms that she had almost forgotten how peaceful ordinary happiness could look. An older gentleman standing beside her noticed her expression. "Beautiful family," he said, assuming Ethan was someone she knew. Claire answered almost instinctively, "Yes." Then she caught herself and quietly corrected the sentence. "They seem beautiful." The gentleman nodded. "That little girl is lucky. A father like that cannot be measured by a paycheck." His words lingered long after he walked away. Claire watched Ethan lift Maya effortlessly so she could place her painted birdhouse onto the display shelf. He celebrated her tiny accomplishment as though she had just won the highest honor imaginable. No cameras surrounded them. No audience applauded. There was only a father protecting the joy of his daughter, and somehow that simple scene carried more meaning than every speech given that afternoon. Claire lowered her eyes for a moment, quietly wondering whether the greatest success she had spent years chasing had always been standing just a few feet away without ever asking to be noticed. Ivy-colored afternoon light filtered through the tall harbor windows as the charity gala settled into an easy rhythm of quiet conversations and gentle laughter. Ethan helped Maya wash the last traces of blue paint from her hands before handing her a warm chocolate chip cookie from the refreshment table. She thanked the volunteer with perfect manners, something Ethan had never forced but always modeled. "Daddy, can we look at the boats after this?" she asked. He smiled. "If the weather stays nice, we can spend 10 minutes by the water before we head home." Maya nodded happily, already imagining the sailboats drifting across Boston Harbor. A few yards away, Claire accepted another handshake from a local business leader, but her attention continued drifting back toward Ethan almost against her own will. Every few minutes, she found herself noticing another small act of kindness that no one else seemed to see. He thanked every volunteer by name after reading their name tags. He held open doors without making a performance of it. He bent down whenever a child spoke to him, giving each one his full attention as though nothing in the world mattered more during those few seconds. Daniel quietly returned carrying 2 coffee cups. "You have not moved very far in the last half hour," he observed with a gentle smile. Claire accepted one of the cups. "Have you ever met someone who reminds you of who you used to be?" Daniel considered the question. "Once." "Did you speak to them?" Claire asked. He shook his head. "Sometimes I thought the memory was safer than the conversation." His answer lingered longer than either of them expected. Nearby, 2 longtime donors recognized Claire and approached with warm greetings. One of them, an older woman named Margaret Ellis who had supported children's charities for decades, noticed where Claire's eyes kept wandering. "You seem distracted today," Margaret said kindly. Claire smiled with polite honesty. "Perhaps I am." Margaret followed her gaze toward Ethan and Maya. "The gentleman with the little girl?" Claire nodded almost imperceptibly. Margaret smiled knowingly. "They volunteer here every month." Claire looked surprised. "Every month?" "Almost without fail," Margaret replied. "He never asks for recognition. Sometimes he fixes broken shelves. Sometimes he helps children with art projects. Last winter, he quietly donated winter coats after working extra weekend shifts. I only learned about it because the receipts accidentally came to my office." Claire remained silent. Margaret continued softly. "Good people have a way of making generosity look ordinary." Those words settled deep inside Claire's heart. Success had introduced her to influential people, talented people, ambitious people, but she suddenly realized how rarely she encountered someone whose character remained unchanged whether anyone was watching or not. Across the room, Maya noticed a young girl sitting alone near the reading corner, carefully holding a stuffed rabbit with one missing ear. Without hesitation, Maya walked over carrying one of the extra crayons she had received earlier. Ethan watched from a respectful distance, allowing his daughter to choose kindness on her own. Within moments, the 2 girls were coloring together as though they had known each other for years. Ethan smiled quietly. Claire noticed that smile. It was exactly the same smile she remembered from high school whenever he saw someone else happy. He had never measured success by what he owned. He measured it by what he could quietly give away. As she watched him, another memory surfaced with remarkable clarity. During their senior year, Ethan had spent 3 evenings repairing the front porch of an elderly neighbor who could no longer afford the work. When Claire asked why he never told anyone about it, he had simply answered, "If kindness needs an audience, it starts becoming something else." She had never forgotten those words, even after 15 years. She had repeated them silently during difficult board meetings, lonely holidays, and nights when the city lights outside her apartment felt colder than the winter air. Standing only a short distance away now, Claire realized that while careers had changed, addresses had changed, and entire lives had unfolded, the quiet foundation of the man she once admired had remained exactly the same. And for the first time since seeing him again, she allowed herself to believe that perhaps some things worth waiting for did not disappear with time. They simply waited for the right moment to be seen again. The afternoon slowly drifted toward evening, and the golden sunlight stretching across Boston Harbor painted the water with long ribbons of amber and silver. Inside the gallery, the crowd had become smaller, allowing conversations to slow into something more personal. Ethan stood beside one of the large windows while Maya admired the sailboats rocking gently against their docks. "Do you think they ever get tired of floating?" she asked. Ethan smiled. "Maybe they do, but they still trust the water to carry them where they need to go." Maya considered his answer with the thoughtful silence that often surprised adults. "Kind of like people?" she asked. Ethan nodded. "Exactly like people." Claire had wandered toward the same window without intending to interrupt them. She stopped several feet away, pretending to admire the harbor while quietly listening. That was another thing she remembered about Ethan. He never gave children simple answers. He gave them honest ones. Years ago, when they had volunteered together at a neighborhood reading program, he had told a frightened little boy that courage was not about feeling brave. It was about choosing kindness even while feeling afraid. Claire had carried those words through college, through failed relationships, through endless business negotiations where confidence often mattered more than compassion. Somehow, hearing Ethan speak to Maya now made the years between them feel strangely transparent. Maya suddenly noticed Claire standing nearby and smiled without hesitation. "Miss Whitmore, do you like boats too?" Claire returned the smile. "I do, especially sailboats." Maya pointed toward the harbor. "Daddy says they trust the wind even when they cannot see where it is taking them." Claire looked at Ethan. "That sounds like something worth remembering." Ethan offered a polite smile. "Sometimes children ask questions that deserve more than one-word answers." "I agree," Claire replied softly. Their conversation lasted only a few seconds, yet something subtle shifted between them. Ethan still could not identify why speaking with her felt unexpectedly familiar. It was not her appearance alone. It was her calm voice, the gentle pause before she answered. Even the way she tilted her head while listening awakened fragments of memories that refused to become complete. Before either of them could say more, Daniel approached Claire carrying a slim leather portfolio. "I apologize for interrupting, but the hospital foundation director has arrived." Claire glanced at the folder before quietly shaking her head. "Please give me another 5 minutes." Daniel looked surprised again, but simply nodded. After he walked away, Claire turned back toward Ethan. "Your daughter has wonderful manners." Ethan looked proudly at Maya, who was now helping another child retrieve colored pencils that had rolled beneath a table. "She teaches herself more than I teach her," he said with a quiet laugh. "I just try not to get in the way." Claire smiled. "I have a feeling she would disagree." Ethan laughed softly, and the sound reached Claire with the same warmth she remembered from another lifetime. For one impossible second she was 18 again, sitting beside him on an old wooden bench outside the public library, laughing over terrible cafeteria coffee while planning futures that neither of them would ever live. The memory disappeared as quickly as it had arrived. Ethan noticed Claire looking at him with unusual intensity. "Have we met before?" he asked gently. The question hung between them like the evening light settling over the harbor. Claire felt her heartbeat quicken, but she kept her expression calm. She could answer with one word. She could tell him everything. Instead, she chose patience over impulse. "I think life lets certain faces stay with us," she said quietly, "even when we cannot immediately remember where they belong." Ethan considered her answer. It somehow felt both true and incomplete. Maya skipped back toward them holding 2 paper butterflies that another volunteer had folded for the children. She handed one to her father and unexpectedly offered the other to Claire. This one is for you, she said. Claire accepted the delicate paper butterfly with careful hands, as though it were made of something far more fragile than folded paper. She stared at the tiny blue wings for several silent seconds because 15 years earlier another butterfly, folded by Ethan's patient hands, had quietly become the one memory she could never bring herself to throw away. Claire carefully turned the small paper butterfly between her fingers, tracing the folded edges with a thumb that trembled almost invisibly. It was impossible for anyone else to understand why such an ordinary piece of paper carried the weight of an entire chapter of her life. Ethan noticed the unusual care with which she held it, but before he could ask another question, Maya spotted a volunteer inviting children outside to release biodegradable paper wishes into the evening breeze. "Daddy, can we go?" she asked eagerly. Ethan smiled. "Only if we stay close to the group." Maya nodded enthusiastically before hurrying toward the harbor patio with several other children. Claire instinctively followed a few steps behind, while Ethan walked beside her, both of them keeping their attention on Maya. The silence between them no longer felt uncomfortable. It felt familiar. Outside, the cool ocean air carried the scent of salt and cedar as small waves tapped gently against the wooden pier. The skyline shimmered beneath the soft glow of early evening, and dozens of tiny paper wishes floated upward before disappearing into the open sky. Maya watched them with wide eyes. "Do wishes really come true?" she asked. Ethan rested his hands lightly in his jacket pockets. "Sometimes they do. Sometimes they simply remind us not to stop hoping." Claire smiled without looking at him. "That sounds like something you have believed for a very long time." Ethan chuckled quietly. "Maybe longer than I realized." She turned toward him. "Hope is not easy to hold on to." "No," Ethan agreed. "But giving it away is usually easier than keeping it for yourself." Claire lowered her eyes. There it was again. Another sentence that sounded exactly like the young man she had once known. Different words. The same heart. A harbor volunteer approached carrying a tray of hot apple cider. "Complimentary drinks for everyone outside," she said warmly. Ethan accepted one cup for himself and another for Claire without thinking twice. "Thank you," Claire said as their fingers briefly brushed while exchanging the cup. The smallest touch lasted less than a second, yet both of them paused almost imperceptibly. Neither mentioned it. Nearby, Maya had begun talking with an elderly veteran wearing a Foundation volunteer badge. The man smiled as she proudly explained every detail of her painted butterfly and birdhouse. Ethan watched from a respectful distance, allowing the conversation to unfold naturally. The veteran looked toward Ethan and called out, "You have raised an extraordinary young lady." Ethan answered with quiet humility. "She reminds me every day how much I still have to learn." The older man laughed. "Good parents always say that." Claire listened carefully. She had spent years surrounded by people eager to list their accomplishments, yet Ethan consistently redirected every compliment away from himself. It was never false modesty. It was simply who he was. "You always let other people shine first, do not you?" she asked before realizing the question had escaped her thoughts aloud. Ethan looked at her with mild surprise. "I suppose everyone has enough battles that nobody else can see. If I can make someone's day a little lighter, why would I not?" His answer settled gently into the evening air. Claire felt another memory return with startling clarity. She remembered volunteering beside him at a community food drive when they were teenagers. An elderly woman had thanked Ethan for carrying her groceries to the bus stop, and afterward, she asked him why he never seemed in a hurry. He had smiled exactly as he smiled now and answered, "People remember how we made them feel long after they forget what we said." Claire had carried that sentence through 15 lonely years without ever hearing it spoken again. She looked at Ethan, searching his face for one unmistakable clue that would finally unlock his memory. He looked back with growing curiosity, sensing that the stranger beside him somehow knew parts of his life that he had not shared with anyone in a very long time. Before either of them could say another word, Maya came running toward them holding a tiny seashell she had found near the edge of the pier. "Look what the water gave me," she said happily, placing it into Claire's hand as naturally as though they had known each other forever. Claire closed her fingers gently around the shell, suddenly realizing that some of life's most important reunions did not begin with grand speeches. They began with quiet moments that refused to let the past remain buried. Before we continue, take a quick second to subscribe to Black Dad Destiny if you have not already. If you love powerful family dramas, surprising stories, real-life-inspired journeys, and stories with meaningful life lessons, you are in the right place. Your support helps us create a brand new cinematic story every single day. Claire slipped the tiny seashell into the pocket of her coat as though it were something far more valuable than anyone else could imagine. The evening breeze had grown cooler, and the last golden streaks of sunlight rested quietly across Boston Harbor. Guests slowly returned inside for the closing reception, but Claire remained near the railing for another moment, watching Ethan lift Maya onto a weathered wooden bench so she could see a sailboat gliding toward the marina. It was such an ordinary scene that most people would have forgotten it within minutes. Claire knew she would remember it for the rest of her life. "Daddy, do you think that family on the boat is happy?" Maya asked. Ethan looked toward the distant sailboat before answering. "I hope they are. Every family has storms that nobody else can see. What matters is whether they keep choosing each other after the clouds come." Claire lowered her eyes. Those words settled gently into the quiet place she had spent years trying to protect from disappointment. She had built buildings that would stand for generations, yet somehow one simple sentence from Ethan carried more strength than any award hanging in her office. As they stepped back inside, the foundation director announced that a collection of handwritten wishes created by the children would be displayed near the entrance before being archived as part of the organization's annual tradition. Curious guests gathered around the exhibit. Maya proudly searched for her own card while Ethan stood nearby, smiling each time another parent celebrated a child's drawing. Claire approached the display from the opposite side. Hundreds of colorful notes covered the wall, each carrying a dream written in careful handwriting. One card immediately caught her attention. It belonged to Maya. In large, uneven letters it read, "I wish my daddy smiles even more because he makes everybody else smile first." Claire felt her throat tighten. She glanced toward Ethan, who had not yet noticed what his daughter had written. Instead, he was helping an elderly guest retrieve a cane that had slipped gently to the floor. "Always someone else first. Always." Daniel quietly joined Claire beside the display. "The board approved the scholarship expansion," he said. "It is wonderful news." Claire nodded absent-mindedly. "It is." Daniel studied her expression before speaking again. "You have barely looked at your phone all afternoon." Claire smiled softly. For the first time in years, it did not feel important. Daniel followed her gaze toward Ethan. "Whoever he is, he seems to have reminded you of something." Claire answered after a long pause. "Not something." She looked back at the wall of children's wishes. "Someone I thought I had lost forever." Across the room, Maya finally found her card and excitedly pulled on Ethan's sleeve. Daddy read it. Ethan leaned closer, reading every word slowly. He smiled with quiet emotion before kneeling beside his daughter. "That might be the nicest gift anyone has ever given me." Maya wrapped her arms around his neck without saying anything else. Claire watched the embrace through eyes that had begun to glisten. She remembered another embrace many years earlier outside the public library after Ethan had learned she received a college acceptance letter. He had celebrated her future with genuine joy, asking for nothing in return. She had always intended to thank him properly. Life had simply interrupted before she ever had the chance. As the closing announcements echoed through the gallery, a volunteer invited guests to take home one small keepsake from the children's art table. Maya immediately chose another folded paper butterfly and handed it to her father. Ethan smiled. "I think one butterfly is enough for me." Maya shook her head. "This one is not for you." She turned and walked directly toward Claire. Without hesitation, she placed the delicate paper butterfly into Claire's hands. "Sometimes people need two," she said with complete innocence. Claire looked down at the tiny blue wings, then slowly raised her eyes toward Ethan. This time, when their gazes met, something shifted inside him with unmistakable force. A forgotten afternoon, a folded butterfly, a young blonde girl laughing beneath maple trees. The memory did not fully return, but for the first time in 15 years, the door leading back to it quietly began to open. The gallery had grown noticeably quieter as volunteers began collecting display stands and carefully packing the children's artwork for transport. Outside, the harbor lights reflected across the water like scattered stars, while inside the warmth of the old brick building invited the remaining guests to linger a little longer. Ethan could not explain why his thoughts refused to leave the elegant woman standing only a few yards away. The paper butterfly Maya had placed into Claire's hands had awakened something that felt almost familiar, like hearing the first few notes of a song he had not listened to since childhood. He watched Claire carefully fold the butterfly and place it inside her purse with remarkable tenderness. Most people would have slipped it into a pocket without another thought. She handled it as though it belonged beside something already precious. "Daddy," Maya whispered, gently tugging on his sleeve. "I think Miss Whitmore looks a little sad." Ethan followed his daughter's gaze before answering quietly. "Sometimes people carry things we cannot see." Maya nodded thoughtfully. "Maybe she needs another butterfly." Ethan smiled. "Maybe she already has enough hope. Maybe she just needs time." Claire happened to overhear those last few words. They landed gently in her heart because time had become the one thing she could never recover. 15 birthdays. 15 Christmas mornings. 15 years of wondering whether Ethan had built a happy life somewhere beyond her reach. Daniel approached once more, carrying a small leather-bound guest book that donors occasionally signed before leaving the annual event. "Miss Whitmore," he said softly, "the chairman asked whether you would like to write a message for next year's scholarship recipients." Claire accepted the book and uncapped the fountain pen resting inside the cover. She stared at the blank page for several silent seconds before writing only one sentence. "May kindness always find the people who need it most." She closed the book without signing her name. Daniel read the sentence and smiled. "That sounds very personal." Claire answered almost in a whisper. "It always was." Across the room, an elderly volunteer named Margaret carefully carried a weathered cardboard memory box from one display table to another. The lid shifted unexpectedly, allowing several old photographs and folded programs from previous charity events to slide onto the floor. Ethan instinctively stepped forward to help gather them before anyone else noticed. Claire joined him without hesitation. For a brief moment, they knelt side by side, quietly collecting scattered memories that belonged to strangers. Margaret laughed warmly. "Thank you both." These old keepsakes seemed determined to escape every year. Ethan handed her a stack of photographs with his familiar, gentle smile. Some memories simply refused to stay in boxes. Claire paused the instant she heard those words. Years earlier, after helping clean out the basement of the neighborhood library, Ethan had said exactly the same thing while discovering an old scrapbook tucked behind a shelf. She slowly lifted the final photograph from the polished floor. It showed the now-closed train station surrounded by brilliant autumn leaves. On the back, written in fading blue ink, were the words Community Youth Volunteer Day, October 14th. Ethan accepted the photograph from her fingertips. His eyes remained fixed on the image longer than before. A wooden bench. Fallen maple leaves. A young woman laughing as paper butterflies floated through the air during a neighborhood festival. Another memory surfaced, clearer this time. He could almost hear her voice, though her name still remained hidden beyond the edge of his recollection. Claire noticed the change in his expression immediately. "Does it seem familiar?" she asked gently. Ethan looked from the photograph to her face. "I feel like I was there." His voice carried honest uncertainty rather than confidence. "I just cannot remember who I was with." Claire drew a slow breath, carefully holding back the answer that had waited inside her heart for so many years. She knew the truth deserved more than a hurried confession in the middle of a departing crowd. Some memories returned all at once. Others needed patience before they could finally find their way home. Claire remained standing beside the old photograph long after Margaret had carried the memory box away. The faded image of the train station rested gently in Ethan's hands, and for the first time that evening, silence no longer felt like uncertainty. It felt like a bridge slowly rebuilding itself one weathered plank at a time. Maya looked up at her father with quiet curiosity. "Daddy, are you thinking about something?" Ethan smiled softly before kneeling beside her. "I think I am remembering something that has been asleep for a very long time." Maya slipped her small hand into his. "Sometimes memories wake up slowly." Ethan laughed quietly. "You are wiser than most grown-ups." Claire listened from only a few feet away, her heart growing heavier with every passing second. She had promised herself that if she ever found Ethan again, she would never rush the truth. 15 years deserved patience. It deserved honesty. More than anything, it deserved kindness. Daniel approached one final time, this time without a schedule or a folder. "Everyone else has gone," he said gently. "The staff is beginning to close the building." Claire nodded. Thank you, Daniel. I will be leaving soon. He glanced toward Ethan and Maya before offering Claire a quiet smile. Whatever this evening has meant to you, I hope it brings you peace. After he walked away, Claire drew a slow breath and stepped closer. Ethan turned toward her, still holding the old photograph. I have been trying to understand why everything about today feels familiar, he admitted. Your voice, the butterflies, even that picture. Claire looked at the photograph before meeting his eyes. Some places never really leave us, she answered. Ethan studied her face once more. This time he noticed something he had overlooked all afternoon. When she smiled, only one side of her mouth lifted first. She had smiled exactly the same way as the girl who used to laugh at his terrible jokes outside the public library. Another memory surfaced. A rainy afternoon. Two teenagers sharing one umbrella because the wind had broken hers. A promise to meet again after graduation. A folded letter. The image disappeared before he could reach the ending. He closed his eyes briefly. I almost remember, he whispered. Claire felt tears gathering but refused to let them fall. You do not have to force it. Maya looked back and forth between them before speaking with the innocent confidence only a child could possess. Maybe you were friends. Ethan smiled gently. Maybe we were. Claire nodded. We were. It was the first completely honest answer she had given him all evening. Ethan looked at her carefully. Good friends. She smiled with quiet warmth. The kind who believed they would always stay in each other's lives. The words settled between them without accusation, without regret, and without blame. Ethan searched his memory again, and this time one name drifted quietly through the fog. Claire. He did not say it aloud. Not yet. But the name remained, no longer lost, only waiting for certainty. Outside the tall harbor windows, the last traces of daylight faded into a sky filled with early evening stars. Volunteers switched off display lights one row at a time, leaving only the warm glow near the entrance. Margaret passed by carrying her coat and smiled at the three of them. Funny how life brings people back together, she said. Sometimes the longest journeys and only a few steps from where they began. Ethan watched her leave before looking once more at Claire. Would you mind if we talked again someday? He asked quietly. There was no pressure in his voice, only genuine curiosity. Claire's smile deepened with relief she could barely contain. I would like that very much. Maya squeezed both of their hands at the same time without realizing the quiet miracle unfolding around her. In that simple gesture, the years between yesterday and tomorrow seemed just a little shorter, and for the first time in a very long while, all three of them walked toward the exit carrying something lighter than they had brought inside. The cool evening air welcomed them as they stepped outside the harbor gallery together. The crowd had nearly disappeared, leaving only the distant sound of gentle waves brushing against the wooden docks and the soft ringing of sailboat masts swaying in the breeze. Maya skipped a few steps ahead, fascinated by the reflections dancing across the water, while Ethan and Claire followed at an unhurried pace. Neither of them seemed eager to end the conversation that had waited quietly for 15 years to begin again. They stopped near the old railing overlooking the harbor where the city lights shimmered like scattered lanterns across the calm surface. Ethan rested his hands lightly against the weathered wood, looking out toward the horizon before speaking. I keep seeing pieces of the past, he admitted. Not enough to understand everything, just enough to know they mattered. Claire stood beside him, leaving a respectful distance between them. She understood that memories could not be forced. They arrived only when the heart felt safe enough to receive them. You once told me that memories are like old lighthouses, she said softly. Even when their lights grow dim, they still remember where the shore is. Ethan turned toward her slowly. His expression changed. The sentence reached somewhere deep inside him, unlocking another forgotten moment. He saw two teenagers sitting on a wooden bench outside the public library after sunset. Claire had been worried about leaving for college. He had pointed toward the distant lighthouse and smiled before speaking those exact words. His breathing slowed. I said that, he whispered. Claire nodded gently. You did. Another memory followed almost immediately. The train station. Autumn leaves swirling across the platform. A folded letter inside Claire's hands. The promise that they would meet before she left for school. Then only silence. Ethan looked down at the old photograph he was still carrying. I remember waiting, he said quietly. I remember getting there late. Claire closed her eyes for a brief moment. She had imagined this conversation countless times, yet nothing prepared her for hearing those words. Ethan continued, his voice calm but heavy with realization. There was an accident on the highway that afternoon. Traffic stopped for hours. By the time I reached the station, the platform was empty. Claire looked at him, surprise filling her face. You came? Ethan nodded slowly. I came as fast as I could. I searched every platform. I even asked the station manager whether another train was scheduled. He gave a faint, bittersweet smile. I thought you had decided not to come. Claire lowered her eyes. I waited until the final train left. Her voice remained steady, but every word carried years of quiet longing. After that, I believed you had changed your mind. Neither of them blamed the other. There was no anger waiting beneath the truth. Only sadness for the years that had quietly slipped away because of one afternoon neither of them had been able to control. Maya wandered back toward them holding a smooth stone she had found near the edge of the walkway. She looked from Ethan to Claire, sensing the unusual stillness between them. Without saying anything, she slipped her hand into her father's. Ethan smiled gently at his daughter before looking back at Claire. She drew one careful breath, her eyes shining in the warm harbor lights. At last she allowed herself to speak the words she had carried through every birthday, every holiday, every lonely evening, and every unanswered question that life had placed before her. Her voice was barely louder than the breeze moving across the water. I waited 15 years. Ethan did not answer immediately. Instead, he looked at her with quiet understanding, no longer seeing a stranger standing beside him, but the young woman whose kindness had once helped shape the man he had become. Then, without a single dramatic gesture or hurried promise, he reached out with gentle respect and held her hand for the first time since they had been teenagers, as though both of them understood that some journeys did not need to begin again because, deep inside, they had never truly ended. Claire did not pull her hand away. For several quiet seconds, neither of them spoke. The harbor breeze carried the scent of salt water across the old wooden pier while the city lights shimmered behind them. But neither Ethan nor Claire seemed to notice. 15 years of unanswered questions had finally found an answer that required no villain, no betrayal, and no anger. Only the painful truth that sometimes life changes everything through a single afternoon no one can control. Ethan looked at her with quiet regret. I spent years wondering why you never came, he admitted. Claire smiled through tears that she no longer tried to hide. And I spent 15 years believing you chose not to. Neither of them blamed the other. Instead, they mourned the years they could never get back. Maya looked from one adult to the other, sensing that something important had happened even if she could not fully understand it. She slipped one small hand into Ethan's and gently reached for Claire's with the other. I think people shouldn't stay lonely if they don't want to, she said with complete innocence. Both adults laughed softly through their tears. Sometimes the wisest words never come from the oldest person. Claire knelt until she was at Maya's eye level. Thank you for sharing your butterflies with me today. Maya smiled proudly. Daddy says butterflies only fly because they stop being afraid of changing. Claire glanced toward Ethan. You really taught her that. Ethan shook his head with a humble smile. I tried. Claire looked back at Maya. No, I think she learned it because she watched you live it. Silence settled over them again, but this time it was peaceful rather than uncertain. Daniel walked over from the gallery entrance. The driver is waiting whenever you're ready, Claire. She looked at Ethan for a brief moment before answering. He can wait. Then she turned back toward Ethan. Would you have dinner with Maya and me next Saturday? Nothing complicated. Just 3 people with a lot of catching up to do. Ethan looked at his daughter. Maya was already smiling. I think somebody already answered for both of us, he said with a quiet laugh. Claire laughed too, her first completely unguarded laugh in many years. As they slowly walked toward the parking area together, Maya skipped a few steps ahead before suddenly stopping. Wait. She ran back, unfolded the last paper butterfly still hidden inside her jacket pocket, and placed it into Ethan's hand. You kept giving hope to everyone else, she whispered. I think it's your turn now. Ethan stared at the tiny blue butterfly for a long moment before looking at Claire. This time, neither of them was looking backward. The camera of memory no longer lingered on the train station where 2 young hearts had missed each other. Instead, it rested on 3 quiet figures walking side by side beneath the harbor lights, one little girl between them, Two lives reunited by truth instead of coincidence, and a future that no longer needed to erase the past to become beautiful. Because sometimes love is not about finding the perfect moment. It is about discovering that kindness waited faithfully until both hearts were finally ready to come home.